My husband gifted me a high-end cosmetic box wrapped in deep red velvet for our third wedding anniversary. That night, while away on a business trip, he called to ask if I had applied it yet. I gave a cynical laugh and replied, "Your mother thought it looked so beautiful that she snatched it and slathered it all over her own face." Suddenly, he shrieked through the phone like a slaughtered animal. "You killed my mother. If she dies, you are dead too." Exactly 10 minutes later, I kicked down my mother-in-law's bedroom door. The sight before me made me gag. She was clawing off chunks of her own facial skin. Blood mixed with white foam was smeared across the hardwood floor, and the sickening stench of burning flesh punched me straight in the nose. Why did a box of cosmetics turn into a lethal acid? And why did a smirk creep onto my face as I watched her writhe in agony? I am Hannah, 28 years old. From the outside looking in, my marriage to Paul was a picture-perfect life enclosed in a gold-plated frame. Paul was the head of biochemical research at a massive pharmaceutical corporation. He had an intellectual aura, spoke politely, drove a luxury BMW, and we lived in a high-end Boston townhouse. The day I put on my wedding dress, my relatives back in my rural Midwestern hometown said I had hit the absolute jackpot. But only I knew that behind those exquisitely carved oak doors lay a dark dungeon where my life force was drained away day by day. My tragedy did not begin with physical abuse, but with Martha, Paul's biological mother. Martha was a domineering widow who treated her son like a god and her daughter-in-law like a blood-sucking leech. In that 3-story townhouse, I had no right to privacy. Martha had a sick hobby of invading our master bedroom. She would rummage through my things and casually confiscate anything she found either offensive or desirable. From a designer lipstick a friend gave me, to a handbag I had saved up 6 months to buy, to the expensive dietary supplements my own mother sent me to recover from a painful miscarriage. She took it all. She did not take these things because she lacked money. She took them to assert her absolute supremacy in this house. When I broke down in tears and confronted her, she just tilted her chin up, her eyes as sharp as a razor. "You live in my son's house, eat my son's food. The things in this house belong to me. So what if I take them to use? A farm girl like you using these things is just a waste." Where was Paul during those times? He always showed up right after the damage was done, wrapping me in a deceptively warm embrace, stroking my hair, and pouring bland, comforting words into my ear. "She is getting old, her mind isn't right. Why exhaust yourself arguing with her? They are just trivial things. I will buy you replacements 10 times better tomorrow. You are the wife, the daughter-in-law. Just endure it a little to keep the peace in the house. I love you the most. Keep the peace." That wretched phrase had chained me by the neck for 3 whole years. I had endured it to the point of total numbness. I learned to hide my valuable items in the glove compartment of my car. On my vanity, I purposely left flashy but cheap items for Martha to loot to her heart's content. I thought I had found a way to survive in this hell. Until the morning of October 10th, our 3rd wedding anniversary. It was pouring rain that day. Paul did not leave for work early as usual. He woke up, made breakfast, and brought it to me in bed. His eyes looked at me with an unusual, intense affection, a gaze that sent a slight shiver down my spine, though I could not name the feeling at the time. He wiped the corner of my mouth and pulled a deep, red velvet box out of his briefcase. It was tied with a beautiful, mysterious gold silk ribbon. "Happy 3rd anniversary, my beautiful wife. I have noticed your skin looking a bit pale and exhausted lately. I had to use some underground connections to hand-carry this cellular regeneration cream back from Switzerland. It is an internal prototype, not sold to the public. Make sure you use it right after your shower tonight. You must apply a really thick, heavy layer all over your face and neck. Just leave it on and go to sleep. When you wake up tomorrow morning, you will feel like you have transformed into a completely different person." I held the box, feeling its heavy weight. As I reached to untie the gold ribbon, Paul's hand suddenly clamped down on mine. His grip was so tight it sent a jolt of pain through my fingers. "Do not open it yet. It is a pure compound. If you open it now, the air will oxidize it and it will lose all its pharmacological effects. Wait until tonight. I have a classified project at the New Jersey Industrial Park tonight, so I definitely will not be back. Make sure you lock the doors carefully, and promise me you will apply this cream before you go to sleep. Promise me." Paul's exaggerated enthusiasm made me pause, but I brushed it off, assuming he just felt guilty for being away on our anniversary. I nodded and placed the cream jar on the most conspicuous spot on my oak vanity. Paul grabbed his suitcase and left. I spent the whole day deep cleaning the house. Around 8 p.m., Martha came home from playing bridge at the country club. The moment she stepped inside, she reeked of sherry and cheap perfume, a habit she refused to break. As she passed my room, she pushed the door wide open without bothering to knock. I was busy folding laundry on the bed. Martha swept her owl-like eyes around the room, and immediately, the vibrant red velvet box catching the light grabbed her attention. Without hesitation, she strode over and roughly ripped off the gold ribbon. The lid popped open. Inside was a pitch-black glass jar, so dark it seemed to absorb all the light. It had a silver-plated lid and not a single word or label on it. I saw her eyes light up with the gleam of pure greed. She let out a cold snort. Well, leeching off my son's money again to buy what kind of luxury trash this time? Probably some whitening or anti-aging cream, right? Let us see if putting this on makes you look less like country trash. I sighed and looked away. My exhaustion had reached its peak. Just take it, apply whatever you want. I was sick to death of fighting over inanimate objects only to be labeled a disrespectful daughter-in-law. Later, when Paul called, I would tell him exactly what happened so he could deal with his own mother. At worst, it would just be another speech about enduring her for the sake of peace. Seeing my silence, Martha grew even more smug. She sneered, snatched the pitch-black glass jar, and spun around, walking straight to her bedroom at the end of the hall. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a deafening thud. The entire three-story house sank into an eerily dead silence. The sound of rain drumming on the balcony kept a steady rhythm. I went into the bathroom, washed my hair, removed my makeup, and tried to wash away the suffocating atmosphere of my anniversary. The clock struck exactly 10:30 p.m. I was sitting on the bed blow-drying my hair when my phone vibrated violently on the mattress. The screen lit up with the caller ID hubby. I turned off the dryer, ran a hand through my damp hair, and hit answer. Hey honey, I just got to the hotel. It is raining so hard. Have you showered yet? Paul's voice sounded smooth, but if you paid close attention, you could catch a strange, subtle tremor at the end of his words. His breathing was rapid and shallow, exactly like a man standing in front of a monitor watching a bomb he just triggered, waiting for the explosion. I showered. Did you get wet on the drive? I am fine. Did you use the cream I gave you? Apply a lot of it. A really thick layer. Does your skin feel a cooling sensation? Once you are done, turn off the lights and go straight to sleep. Do not stay up late. Paul's overly eager, pushy tone reignited my irritation from earlier. Remembering Martha's arrogant face when she stole the gift, I gave a cold laugh and purposely dragged out every single word with dripping sarcasm. What cream? That pitch-black glass jar your friend hand-carried back for you? I am sorry. Before I could even lay a fingernail on it, your mother barged into my room and snatched it. She said she wanted to test out the expensive stuff to see if she could turn into a goddess. Right now, she has probably slathered it all over her entire face. You will have to go buy another jar to replace mine tomorrow. On the other end of the line, a deathly silence descended. It was not a dropped call. It was the frozen silence of blood and muscle, the silence of a human being who had just had a bucket of ice water dumped directly into their brain. 3 seconds passed, feeling as long as a century, and then a shriek tore through my eardrum. It was not speaking. It was a distorted vocal cord, shredding screech of a lunatic. What? My mom took it? She put it on her face? I flinched, pulling the phone away from my ear, frowning in absolute annoyance. Are you crazy? Why are you yelling? You know how she is, always stealing my stuff. Did you expect me to stop her? Oh my God, what the hell did you do? Why did you let her take it? You killed my mother. Go to her room right now. Snatch that jar away, wash her face. Hurry up. If anything happens to her, I will kill you. You are dead, Hannah. My heart skipped a beat. The hand holding the phone turned ice cold. Why would a cosmetic box kill someone? Why would a man who constantly preached they are just trivial things endure her suddenly scream like a bloodthirsty demon demanding my life just because his mother secretly used his skincare gift? The words, if anything happens, kill you. You are dead pierced through my eardrums and stabbed straight into my central nervous system. A rush of freezing air shot from my heels to the top of my head. The most primal survival instinct in my brain set off blaring alarms. That pitch-black glass jar was absolutely not cosmetics. I threw the phone onto the bed and dashed out of the room barefoot. The second-floor hallway was pitch black, save for a faint sliver of light spilling from the crack under Martha's door. The moment I reached the middle of the hallway, a bizarre odor hit me. It was not the fragrance of chemical perfumes. It was an incredibly pungent, acrid smell, like burnt almonds mixed with an overpowering stench of ether that brought tears to my eyes. I pounded my fists against the wooden door. Martha! Martha! Open the door! There was no verbal response. Only a grotesque, frantic scraping sound, like fingernails violently clawing at the hardwood floor. Luckily, the door was not locked from the inside. I twisted the knob, pushed the door open, and stepped in. The scene illuminated by the dim nightlight made my stomach violently churn. A surge of gastric acid rushed up my throat, making me gag. Martha was rolling and thrashing on the floor right at the foot of her bed. Her silk nightgown was shredded to rags. Her hands were curled into claws like an eagle's talons, frantically scratching and tearing the skin off her own face and neck. The skin on her face, neck, and hands, the areas that had come into contact with the cream, no longer looked human. It was glowing red, turning a sickly grayish black, and erupting with tiny, bubbling blisters. Those blisters popped continuously, oozing a foul-smelling, cloudy yellow fluid. The skin she clawed at peeled off in thick chunks, exposing raw, blood-red meat underneath that was actively frothing. Her eyes were rolled back toward the ceiling, the whites bulging with bright red blood vessels that looked ready to burst. Her mouth was unhinged, thick white foam pouring out in massive clumps, mixing with the blood from the claw marks on her lips. She could not scream. Her throat only produced a horrifying, guttural clicking sound, like an animal whose windpipe was being crushed, its lungs entirely unable to take in oxygen. Right next to her, the black glass jar was rolling on the carpet. The silver-plated lid was popped off, and a bit of the cream had spilled out. It was not smooth and white. It was a thick, ash-gray paste, continuously bubbling with tiny air pockets and emitting a thin wisp of smoke. That nauseating, acrid stench was coming straight from it. I stood rooted to the spot, my entire body trembling so violently my teeth chattered together. My brain went completely blank for 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, Paul's command echoed in my mind. Apply a really thick, heavy layer all over your face and neck. When you wake up tomorrow morning, you will feel like you have transformed into a completely different person. He was right. If I had applied this to my face, I would have transformed into a necrotic corpse, dying in absolute excruciating agony. I did not kill Martha. In reality, in just a little while, the person thrashing and foaming at the mouth in a pool of blood, the person being skinned alive chunk by chunk, was supposed to be me. That anniversary gift, that fake affection, those 3 years of love, it was actually a meticulously calculated death sentence that the husband I shared a bed with had beautifully packaged to send me straight to the grave. But the bottomless greed of my mother-in-law had turned her into the perfect scapegoat. Looking at Martha writhing, my heart did not swell with pity. There was only disgust, pure rage, and a thick, dark terror swallowing me whole. I took half a step back, grabbed a bath towel hanging on the rack, soaked it in a basin of water, and threw it hard over Martha's smoking face to slow the chemical corrosion. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Send an ambulance to 45 Elm Street immediately. Someone has been poisoned by a chemical. Severe skin necrosis. Please hurry. The wailing sirens of the ambulance tore through the quiet, rainy night of the neighborhood. Ignoring my nightgown stained with foam and blood, I coldly climbed into the back of the ambulance, following the stretcher to the hospital. Watching Martha gasping for life through an oxygen mask, her facial skin already turning a grotesque black, I slowly clenched my fists. Paul, if she had not taken that jar today, tomorrow you would have been standing there proudly wearing a black suit, mourning your tragically deceased wife. But God has eyes. Tonight, when you rush to the hospital, I am going to look very closely into the eyes of the devil named after my husband. From the moment that glass jar was opened, this marriage became a game of survival. And I swear, I will not let myself be your prey for a single second longer. The ambulance sliced through the thick, rainy night of Boston. The blaring sirens pounded against my chest with every beat. The freezing cabin reeked of medical alcohol, but that sterile scent completely failed to mask another odor radiating from the woman on the stretcher. It was the smell of burning human flesh. It was acrid, charred, blending with the metallic tang of blood and the yellow fluid seeping from the blackened crusts on the face that used to sneer and berate me every single day. Now, Martha was nothing but a twitching mass of meat, her sunken chest heaving in desperate spasms to snatch a tiny bit of oxygen through the plastic mask. I sat huddled in the corner of the vehicle, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles were bone white. Rainwater dripped from my matted hair, cold droplets falling onto my thin nightgown. The attending paramedic was constantly taking her blood pressure, his eyes revealing clear panic as Martha's vital signs plummeted. He turned and asked me about the cause, about the chemical the patient had been exposed to. I shook my head, my eyes completely glazed over, perfectly playing the role of a terrified daughter-in-law whose mother-in-law had suddenly suffered a bizarre medical emergency. But deep inside my cerebral cortex, everything was chillingly, terrifyingly lucid. I remembered the moment a few minutes before the ambulance arrived, standing in the middle of Martha's room, overwhelmed by the stench of acid, looking at the pitch-black jar rolling on the carpet. A survival instinct flared from the deepest part of my soul. I knew that if I left the crime scene as it was, Paul would destroy the evidence at any cost. He was a biochemical expert. He knew exactly how to scrub away every trace, So, before running downstairs to open the door for the paramedics, I grabbed a tissue, quickly swiped a tiny smear of the gray paste stuck to the rim of the silver lid, crumpled the tissue, and shoved it deep into the pocket of the windbreaker I had blindly grabbed from the hallway rack. That smear of cream was no bigger than a pea, but it was the only ticket I had to drag the devil named Paul out into the light. Downtown General Hospital in the early hours of the morning was deserted, flooded with pale, blinding fluorescent lights. The emergency room doors slammed shut, and the red light flashed on. I collapsed onto the row of blue plastic chairs in the hallway, my entire body motionless. Other patients' families walking by looked at me with sympathetic eyes. They probably thought I was in sheer agony because a loved one was on the brink of death. They had no idea I was busy rearranging every single puzzle piece of my 3-year marriage. Why did he want to kill me? Was it because I could not conceive after my miscarriage last year? Was it because he had a mistress but did not want the stigma of divorcing a devoted wife? Or was it something even more despicable? Was he craving something specific from my death? The questions swarmed in my head like maggots. Barely 40 minutes later, the heavy thud of footsteps echoing down the quiet corridor snapped me out of my chaotic thoughts. Paul appeared. He rushed in like a hurricane, his expensive tailored suit wrinkled, his usually slicked-back hair messy and soaked with rain. But the thing that sent a violent shudder through me was the look in his eyes when he saw me sitting perfectly safe and unharmed on the plastic chair, without a single scratch, my face completely intact. Paul's pupils violently contracted. That was not the gaze of a relieved husband seeing his wife safe. It was the gaze of a hunter discovering his trap had snapped shut on the wrong prey. Disappointment, fury, and panic intertwined and flashed across his face for a fraction of a millisecond. Then, before I knew it, he threw on the mask of an incredibly devoted, heartbroken son. Paul lunged forward, his hands gripping my shoulders, squeezing so hard I had to wince. His voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. It was a flawless performance that could have fooled absolutely anyone. He kept asking how his mother was, what the doctor said, how things had spiraled into this nightmare. I lowered my eyes, forcing out a few tears of terror, and sobbed as I recounted the moment I opened the door and found his mother in a pool of blood. The second I mentioned the cream jar rolling on the floor, Paul abruptly let go of me. He shot up, his breathing erratic, frantically digging through his pockets for his car keys. He said he had to go home immediately to get his mother's health insurance cards and ID, otherwise the hospital would not perform the surgery. Health insurance cards at 2 a.m. while his mother was in critical condition. I kept my head down, hiding a freezing smile. I knew exactly what he was going home to do. He needed to dispose of that black glass jar. He needed to scrub the crime scene he had so painstakingly prepared for me. If the police or the hospital demanded a toxicology test, that jar would be his death warrant. I played the role of an obedient wife, nodding tearfully, urging him to hurry so he would not delay his mother's treatment. Paul's shadow disappeared around the corner of the hallway, his footsteps frantic as if chased by ghosts. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, feeling the tissue wrapping the tiny drop of chemical resting silently. Go home, Paul, go clean up that lifeless shell. An hour later, when the head doctor walked out of the ER, his face was deeply lined with tension. He looked at me, sighed, and shook his head. The toxin has corroded the entire epidermis and dermis, destroying the muscle tissue on the patient's face and neck. Worse still, the toxic fumes from the chemical entered her respiratory tract, causing severe chemical burns to her bronchial tubes and acute heart failure. Even if she survives, your mother-in-law will be permanently blind, crippled, and left with a disfigurement so horrific it would make a demon scream. Hearing those words, I slowly closed my eyes. If I had been the one to open that jar tonight, if I had listened to my murderous husband and applied a thick layer to my face before going to sleep, then tomorrow morning, the corpse smelling of burnt flesh in that emergency room would have been me. In the dead of the hospital night, I suddenly realized this war had only just begun, and I had to be the last one standing. 3 days after that night of terror, my mother-in-law was still barely clinging to life in the intensive care unit. Her body was hooked up to a web of tubes, her face wrapped entirely in stark white bandages, leaving only 2 small holes for the ventilator. The gauze constantly seeped a burnt-smelling yellow-brown fluid. Paul took a leave of absence from his company to stay at the hospital 24/7. In the eyes of visiting relatives and friends, he was the ultimate model of a devoted son, so devastated that his eyes were sunken and his face was covered in a heavy, unkempt beard. Only I knew that his exhaustion did not come from the pain of losing his mother. It came from the absolute terror of a murderer waiting for the sword of justice to drop on his neck. On the morning of the 4th day, taking advantage of the fact that Paul was in a meeting with the head physician about the treatment plan, I made an excuse to go home to grab more clothes and cook some soup. Paul could not stop me, but his eyes followed me, fixed with intense scrutiny and anxiety. He knew he had cleaned the crime scene flawlessly, but the paranoid nature of a criminal would not allow him to rest. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the 3-story townhouse, which was now as quiet as a grave. The acrid smell of chemicals still lingered faintly in the air, clinging to the wood grain and the curtain fabrics. I walked straight up to Martha's room. Exactly as I predicted, the scene had been scrubbed to a clinical level of perfection. The rug stained with blood and foam was gone. The floor had been mopped with an overpowering lemon-scented bleach. The pitch-black glass jar, the red velvet box, the gold ribbon, all vanished without a trace. He had disposed of everything flawlessly. I walked back to our master bedroom, the room where I was supposed to die. I stood silently in front of the oak vanity. The memory of that morning rushed back with crystal clarity. What exactly did Paul instruct me to do? Make sure you use it right after your shower tonight. Just leave it on and go to sleep. Turn off the lights and go straight to sleep. Do not stay up late. Why did I have to turn off the lights? If it was a chemical that caused immediate, burning pain, even in the dark I would scream and run to wash my face. But he told me to apply it heavily, lie down, and close my eyes. That proved this chemical had an incubation period. It would slowly seep in, paralyzing the sensory nerves before it began to eat away the flesh. By the time I felt the agony, the poison would have already entered my respiratory tract. My vocal cords would be paralyzed, making it impossible to scream for help. He had calculated everything down to the most microscopic detail. But there was one thing that bothered me. Paul was a psychopath with narcissistic personality disorder. When a man like him goes to such lengths to stage a flawless murder, would he really be willing to miss the moment his masterpiece reached completion? Would he be satisfied just sitting in a New Jersey hotel room imagining his wife writhing in silence? No. He would want to watch. He had to see it with his own eyes. That thought struck my brain like a bolt of lightning. A cold chill ran down my spine, and beads of cold sweat soaked my temples. I slowly raised my head, my eyes sweeping across the bedroom. The spacious room was decorated in a minimalist style. The bed, the wardrobe, the vanity, the TV stand. Everything was familiar. But if he wanted to watch, he had to put an eye somewhere. A location with a full, unobstructed view of the bed and the vanity. I started searching. I tore through the fake floral arrangements, carefully inspected the air conditioning vents, and even took down our wedding portrait from the wall. Nothing. I dropped to my knees, looking under the bed, under the dresser. Still nothing. Time ticked by. The ticking clock made my heart race. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he really just needed me dead. Just as I was about to give up and stand back up, my eyes accidentally locked onto the white cylindrical air purifier sitting in the corner of the room, diagonally across from the bed and vanity. It was a new gadget Paul had bought 2 weeks ago. He had claimed the city air was getting too polluted, and he wanted to protect my lungs. I slowly walked toward the machine. It was still plugged in, emitting a very faint hum. I knelt down and scrutinized every line, every ventilation grill of the machine. And then, at the deepest part of the second filter mesh, perfectly camouflaged beneath the glossy black plastic, I saw it. A tiny circular dot, smaller than the head of a pin. If I had not constantly shifted my viewing angle to catch the reflection of the natural light coming from the window, I would never have spotted it. I held my breath, ran to the desk, grabbed a small medical penlight, and shined it directly at that spot. It was a microscopic camera lens. Right next to the lens, an incredibly tiny red LED light was blinking steadily, once every 2 seconds. It was active. It was hardwired directly into the air purifier's power supply and transmitting data via Wi-Fi. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, clamping both hands over my mouth to keep the choked sobs from escaping my throat. That red eye was staring right at me, lifeless and utterly malicious. That night, when he called me, he wasn't just listening to my voice. He had his tracking app open on his phone. He was waiting to watch me open the velvet box, obediently smear that acid all over my face, and then crawl into bed to wait for death to erode my body. The exact moment I told him his mother had stolen the cream and gone to her room, he shrieked in panic. Because Martha was not in his camera's frame. He lost control because his true prey had slipped out of the trap he was so desperate to watch spring shut. This level of sadism went far beyond the boundaries of humanity. He didn't just want to kill me to rid himself of a burden. He treated my death as entertainment, a live-action snuff film for his own viewing pleasure. I stared intently at that blinking red dot. The tears of terror had dried up entirely, replaced by a raging inferno of hatred incinerating my insides. You wanted to watch me suffer, Paul? You wanted to watch me writhe in a pool of blood? Fine. I will let you watch. I will perform a play for you where you are the director. But I am the one who writes the ending. I did not dismantle the camera. I left everything exactly as it was, pretending to busy myself packing some clothes into a duffel bag, straightening the bed sheets like a dutiful wife. But before I walked out of the room, I purposely stood directly in the camera's line of sight, stared dead into the lens, flashed a subtle, cryptic smile, and turned my back to leave. Game on, darling husband. I carried my bag back to the hospital. By late afternoon, the hallway of the ICU was still freezing cold and thick with the smell of death. Paul was standing at the end of the hall by the stairwell, smoking a cigarette. Seeing me approach, he hurriedly stubbed it out and smoothed his messy hair. I walked up to him, deliberately making my face look hollow and exhausted, my eyes cast down, feigning absolute terror. I knew he had watched the camera at home and saw me pack normally, but he needed to probe to see exactly how much I knew about the origins of that cream. Before stepping into his field of vision, I slipped my finger into my jacket pocket and hit record on my phone. "You brought the clothes?" Paul asked. "Mom still hasn't woken up. The doctor says it looks really bad, Hannah. I am terrified she is not going to make it." "Paul, why did this happen to her?" I cried. "What exactly was in that jar? Why did it destroy her face like that? I am so scared, Paul. If I had put that on my face that night, the person lying in that room right now would be me, wouldn't it?" "Calm down. Do not panic like this." "How can I be calm?" "This morning when I went home, I purposely searched for that black jar to bring to the doctor so they could figure out what toxin is in it, but I could not find it anywhere. It was definitely rolling on her floor that night. You said your friend brought it from Switzerland. How did it turn into lethal poison? Did your friend trick you? We have to call the police. You have to make the person who sold you that cream pay for what they did to your mother." "Shut your mouth! Are you crazy? Do not call the cops." My fake hysteria successfully punctured Paul's calm exterior. He snarled, his voice low but sharp as a blade, his eyes bulging with bloodshot veins. He frantically looked down the hall, and seeing no one, he reached out, grabbed my bicep violently, and dragged me forcefully into the fire stairwell. The heavy steel door slammed shut, locking us in a dim, yellow-lit space reeking of stale cigarette smoke. He pinned me hard against the wall, his grip squeezing so tightly I felt like my arm bone was about to shatter. The gentle, intellectual face of the husband I had lived with for 3 years was now twisted and grotesquely deformed, baring his teeth in pure animalistic rage. "Listen to me, and listen good, Hannah. There was no Swiss cream. You will not breathe a single word about that damn anniversary gift to anyone. Not the cops, not the doctors. Do you understand me?" "What are you saying, Paul?" "I do not understand. Why wouldn't it exist? You handed it to me yourself that morning. You told me to put a thick layer on. Were you trying to kill me, Paul?" I said, "Shut up. If I wanted to kill you, I would have stabbed you to death a long time ago. I would not need to use some complicated chemical trick. The truth is, my mom got scammed. Lately, she has been watching these sketchy online live streams selling miracle skin peels. She wanted to look young again, so she secretly ordered some unregulated, black market peeling cream loaded with toilet bowl acid. She hid it in her room, applied it herself, and went into chemical shock. That is the truth. Do you hear me, you stupid bitch? But the red velvet box? You gave it to me. That was a regular jar of moisturizer I bought at the drugstore. You left it out on the table. Mom saw it looked nice, so she stole it from you. Where she hid it, how should I know? The jar on the floor that night was the black market acid peel she bought herself. The morning she went to the ER, I saw the shipping package under her bed. I was terrified the cops would investigate and cause a massive scandal that would ruin my reputation and my career. So I threw it all away. You are lying! There is no way it is a coincidence. I have to go to the police. I am going to tell them you gave me that black jar. I cannot let your mother die for nothing. You try opening your mouth and see if I do not drag your entire family down to the grave with you." He threatened. "Do you really think the police are going to believe a disrespectful daughter-in-law who constantly fights with her mother-in-law, or a high-ranking corporate executive with money and power like me? Think about it. Who was the only person home with her that night? Who was the only person who could have swapped that cosmetic jar for acid? You. You have hated my mother for years because she takes your things, right? You hated her so much you bought acid and disguised it as face cream to kill her, right? My neighbor's security camera pointing at the street can prove I was not home that night. But you were right there next to her. All I have to do is spend a fortune hiring the best defense attorneys and feed the narrative to the media, and you will instantly become the evil, psychopathic daughter-in-law who poisoned her mother-in-law out of spite. Your family back in your hometown will never be able to show their faces in public again. Your dad has a heart condition. Do you want him to die of shame?" I stood leaning against the freezing concrete wall, my entire body shaking like a leaf. The tears spilling from my eyes were no longer acting. They were born of absolute, overwhelming fury. He had calculated this too perfectly. He had weaponized his failed attempt to murder his wife into a flawless trap to bind me. If I dared to expose the truth, he would flip the script, turning me into the prime suspect for poisoning his mother over a petty grudge. He was utterly confident that with his wealth and influence, he could manipulate the truth and crush a powerless country girl like me. Seeing me crying and cowering in fear, Paul seemed immensely satisfied. He slowly released my arm. He smoothed his collar, his expression shifting as fast as flipping a coin. From a snarling demon, he reverted back to the deeply suffering, forgiving husband. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from my cheeks. His touch made my stomach violently churn, but I bit my lip and stood perfectly still. Good girl. My wife is very smart. I know you understand I am only doing this for our family. With Mom in this condition, I am the one hurting the most. I do not want our family entangled with the law. I do not want the press tearing our lives apart. Later, if the local detectives come to take a family statement, you just cry, act devastated, and tell them exactly what I just said. Mom bought sketchy internet cream and got necrotic burns. I already had someone forge the receipts and documents. Just be a good girl and listen to me. I promise, once everything is settled with Mom, I will make it up to you 1,000 times over. Do you hear me? I know. I will listen to you. I will not say anything to the police. Just please do not hurt my parents. Good. Go wash your face and come out. I will go buy you some soup. You must be exhausted. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, turned around, and pushed open the heavy stairwell door. His footsteps faded down the hall. The second the steel door clicked shut, all the panic and terror on my face vanished without a trace, replaced by a gaze as cold and sharp as a box cutter. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and hit stop on the recording that had been running for the past 10 minutes. I knew perfectly well you wouldn't leave any physical trace behind. I also knew you would use your power to pin the blame on me if I only had my word against yours. You think you are a genius. You think you have me by the throat by threatening my family. But you are wrong, Paul. This audio recording cannot put you in prison right away because it does not physically prove murder. But it is the first point of leverage. You just willingly walked right into my trap. You admitted to knowing about the jar and threatened me to cover up the truth. Keep playing the victim. Keep thinking I am a weak, obedient prey lying still, waiting to be butchered. I will show you that when a woman walks back from the brink of death, she can dig a grave for her enemies deeper than hell itself. That afternoon, after successfully acting my part in front of Paul and getting past a few routine questions from the local precinct detectives, because Paul had already cleaned the scene and used his influence to steer the narrative toward a tragic household accident caused by counterfeit cosmetics, I claimed exhaustion and asked to go home to rest. Paul, naturally, agreed immediately. He needed me out of his sight so he could handle the hospital paperwork and continue playing the heartbroken son. The moment I walked out of the hospital gates, I hailed a cab and went straight to State University. In my jacket pocket, the tissue wrapping the pea-sized smear of cream lay silently, emitting that pungent odor through the plastic Ziploc I had wrapped it in. That was my only hope. The only spear I could use to pierce the flawless defense of my murderous husband. I went to find Liam. He was my best friend from high school and currently a PhD candidate in analytical chemistry. Liam was the only person in this city I could trust implicitly, not just because of our long friendship, but because he had absolutely no social connections to Paul. I met Liam at a quiet coffee shop tucked behind the campus. When I unwrapped the plastic and opened the tissue, Liam leaned in to sniff it and instantly recoiled. He hurriedly grabbed a piece of tape, sealed it tight, and shoved it into a specialized hazard Ziploc bag. The blood drained from his face. His brows furrowed deeply as he looked at me with a mix of total confusion and extreme gravity. Hannah, where the hell did you get this stuff? This is absolutely not cosmetics, or skin peel, or anything meant for human contact. This smell the burnt almonds mixed with heavy ether. It is the chemical signature of fluoroacetic acid combined with a dermal stripping solvent. I was no chemistry expert, but my chest felt like it was crushed under lead. I told Liam the entire horrific story of the previous night. I told him how Paul forced me to lie to the cops and about the recording I secretly made. Liam's hands shook violently around his coffee cup as he listened. He told me to stay put and sprinted straight to the university labs. Almost 4 hours of waiting stretched like 4 centuries. I sat in the corner of the cafe, watching the rush hour traffic in the rain, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. If this was just regular acid, Paul could argue that he was scammed by the seller. I needed proof that this was a purposely weaponized compound. Just after 6 p.m., Liam returned to the cafe holding a stack of spectrometer readouts. There was not a drop of color left in his face. He pulled out a chair, keeping his voice to a bare whisper as if terrified someone was eavesdropping. "Hannah, you need to go to the FBI or the Violent Crimes Unit immediately. This was not an accident. This was a calculated assassination attempt designed by the brain of a monster." Liam spread the papers on the table, using a red pen to circle several complex compounds. He explained it in the simplest terms possible. "The sample I brought was a highly toxic, handcrafted concoction, brilliantly and terrifyingly formulated. The main active ingredient wasn't just fluoroacetic acid, a lethal toxin often used in high-grade rodenticides. It was mixed with dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. DMSO is a solvent that possesses the terrifying ability to penetrate human skin at an astonishing speed, dragging whatever is dissolved in it straight into the bloodstream. He had weaponized a common poison into an absolute dermal absorption weapon." Liam's voice trembled. Whoever mixed this intentionally deceived the victim. The black color and the harsh smell were masked by a cheap industrial fragrance. If you had followed his instructions, applying a thick layer and going to sleep, the DMSO would have dragged the poison through your epidermis straight into your veins. At first, you would only feel a cooling, numbing sensation because he mixed in a local anesthetic. But just 2 hours later, while you were deep asleep, the toxin would destroy your central nervous system, causing acute respiratory failure, seizures, and foaming at the mouth. Finally, the residual acid would react, burning from the inside out, peeling your face clean off. My limbs turned to ice. He didn't just want me dead. He wanted me to die slowly, paralyzed in my sleep. And when my body was found, it would look exactly like a catastrophic anaphylactic shock from toxic black market cosmetics, leading to necrosis. He was a biochemical expert. He had the knowledge and the resources to create this flawless, untraceable weapon. The most bastardly part is, Liam gritted his teeth, DMSO evaporates extremely fast. If the jar is left open or applied and exposed to air, within a few hours, the solvent entirely evaporates. The chemical structure changes, leaving behind residues that look exactly like industrial cleaning agents. He planned his exit route. If the doctors took a biopsy of his mother's skin right now, they would simply conclude she suffered chemical burns from a highly concentrated, unregulated acid peel. I sat completely petrified. The curtain of truth had been ripped away, but behind it stood a cold iron wall of despair. He was too smart, too cunning. My audio recording only proved he threatened me, and Liam's lab report was an unofficial test with no legal weight. Without the original sample, that pitch-black glass jar, the most critical piece of physical evidence, I had nothing. He had destroyed it all. I thanked Liam and begged him to keep this an absolute secret, locking the remaining sample in his lab's secure vault. On the cab ride home, I rested my head against the cold glass window. The tears finally spilled over, unstoppable. It was not from fear, but from a profound, crushing sense of powerlessness. Going up against a brilliant, educated demon felt like an ant trying to bite through a military tank. What was I supposed to do? Going to the police right now was suicide. He would counter-sue for defamation, and with my weak evidence, I would undoubtedly lose. I needed to find his motive. Why did he want to kill me so brutally? When a marriage dies, men ask for a divorce, split the assets, or maybe act awful. Very few resort to calculated murder. Unless he was backed into an absolute corner by massive debt, and the wife was a bloody lifeline of cash. That was it. Only money could turn a human being into a cold-blooded demon. Motive. That word haunted my mind all night. I lay on my familiar bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, occasionally glancing at the air purifier in the corner where the hidden camera's red eye blinked steadily. I had to pretend I was tossing and turning out of concern for my mother-in-law's health. I sniffled occasionally to give the sick director watching the feed exactly what he wanted. In the darkness, my brain worked in overdrive. The next day, I requested an indefinite leave of absence from my job, claiming I needed to care for my critically ill mother-in-law. Paul was, of course, highly satisfied with my obedient, understanding behavior. He handed me a stack of cash, telling me to take good care of her at the hospital while he went to his office to handle a backlog of documents before coming to relieve me. Watching his BMW pull out of the driveway, I immediately called an Uber and told the driver to follow him. I had lived with this man for 3 years. I knew his habits. A man who just narrowly failed a calculated assassination would not have the psychological stability to sit in corporate meetings. He needed to go deal with his leftover loose ends. Exactly as I predicted, the BMW did not head toward the downtown financial district where his company was headquartered. It drove in the opposite direction, toward the desolate outskirts of town, winding through foreclosed subdivisions until it stopped in front of a half-finished, abandoned house surrounded by overgrown weeds. I paid the driver and hid behind a crumbling brick wall about 50 yards away. The property had no gate, and the weeds were knee-high. Paul grabbed a massive black trash bag from his trunk, looked around nervously, and walked inside. About 20 minutes later, he came back out, tossed the black bag into his trunk, and sped off. Waiting until his car completely disappeared, I crept cautiously toward the abandoned house. The smell of mold and rot hit me instantly. The first floor was a hollow shell of shattered drywall and exposed concrete, but in the furthest corner, under the stairs, was a solid steel door. It had no keyhole. It used a digital biometric keypad. I pressed my ear against the freezing metal. No sound, but my nose twitched. From the tiny gap under the door, a faint draft seeped out, carrying that nauseating, acrid, sweet smell. The smell of DMSO and acid. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would shatter my ribs. This was it. This was the Devil's Basement, the lab where he personally synthesized the lethal cream, where he hatched the plan to melt my face off. And that black trash bag he just carried out? He was likely taking his hazardous waste, including that damn black glass jar, to a remote dump or throwing it into a river. Unable to get inside, I backed away, snapped several photos of the property, pinned the GPS location on my phone, and headed back to the hospital. On the way back, my mind raced. He had a secret lab. He bought expensive chemicals to synthesize poisons. Why was he taking all these massive, costly risks? Back at the hospital, while changing into scrubs to enter the ICU, I accidentally overheard two nurses whispering at the station. This family is supposed to be loaded. Why are they being so cheap? The mother has severe necrosis, needs skin grafts, heavy IV antibiotics. The daily bill is easily $10,000. Yesterday, I reminded the son to pay the deposit, and he looked furious. He swiped several credit cards, and almost all of them were declined. I froze. His cards were declined? Paul was a senior director making an easy 6 figures. The townhouse was fully paid off by his mother. We lived comfortably. How on earth could he not have the money for a medical deposit for his own mother? A terrifying premonition flashed in my mind. Thinking back to recent months, Paul was always up late, glaring at his computer screen. Whenever I walked in, he would flinch and slam the laptop shut. Those late-night phone calls on the balcony where he whispered furiously. I had assumed he had a mistress, but no. These were the exact same signs my uncle back home had shown before he lost the farm. A chronic, desperate gambling addiction. That night, while Paul was dozing off on a metal bench in the hospital hallway, completely exhausted, I carefully slipped his secondary phone out of his coat pocket. It was the phone he used strictly for work and banking. I had known his passcode for years but never snooped. My hands shook as I punched in the numbers. The first thing I saw was an avalanche of threat texts. Not from banks, but from illegal offshore betting syndicates and loan sharks. The texts were littered with mob-style threats, promising to break legs and kill family members. The total debt across various bookies wasn't just a few thousand. It was over $1 million. He had been heavily involved in offshore sports betting and crypto margin trading, and he had completely blown his accounts. He sold his soul to the devil to win it back, but only sank deeper. I scrolled down to his email. And there, buried among the spam, was a policy confirmation email from a major life insurance firm that made my blood run completely cold. Policyholder: Paul. Insured: Hannah. Coverage for accidental death or severe chemical poisoning: $2 million. Sole beneficiary: Paul. Issue date: exactly 1 month ago. $2 million. My life, my 3 years of devotion. He had priced it all at $2 million to pay off his gambling debts. He needed me dead. Dead from a tragic, accidental household poisoning caused by bad cosmetics, so he could legally claim the massive payout. His mother, driven by her bottomless greed, had inadvertently saved my life and completely destroyed his flawless plan. The motive was clear. The secret lab was found. Now, it was time for me to make this demon pay. For the next 3 days, the atmosphere was suffocating. Martha remained comatose after her first skin graft surgery. The doctors had to take skin from her thighs to patch her face. But the risk of severe infection was critical. Paul and I took shifts at the hospital. In public, he was still the attentive husband and exhausted son. But whenever it was just the two of us in the hallway, I caught the icy, predatory glares he shot my way. He was trying to gauge exactly how much I knew. That afternoon, I brought a thermos of hot soup from home. Paul was slouched on the metal bench outside the ICU. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised and heavy, his beard completely unkempt. Seeing me, he instantly launched into his routine. He buried his face in his hands, pulling his hair, letting out a long, agonizing sigh. Hannah, the doctor just spoke to me. It looks terrible. Her lungs are weak, and her body is rejecting the skin grafts. At this rate, the bills are piling up to thousands a day. I do not know how to handle this. I set the thermos down. Looking straight at the top of his head, the corner of my mouth twitched into a cold smile, though I kept my voice dripping with concern. Why is that? You are a senior director, your income is huge, and we have hundreds of thousands in savings. Didn't you say you got a massive bonus last quarter? Why can't you cover the bills? I invested all our savings into a startup with some friends. I can't withdraw it without taking a massive penalty. The company is holding the bonuses until the end of the year. I am going crazy here. Hey, do you think you could go back to your hometown, ask your parents to mortgage their farm, and take out a loan? Just a few $100,000 to get mom through this critical phase? I held my breath. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. He owed the mob $1 million. He tried to murder me for life insurance, failed, and was now shameless enough to try and steal my parents' blood, sweat, and tears their farm to save himself? Truly an animal devoid of all humanity. Are you joking, Paul? That land has been in my family for generations. My parents live there. If they mortgage it for your mom and we cannot pay it back, they will be out on the streets. You are an only child. Why don't you sell the townhouse or the BMW to pay for this? Why go after my parents' farm? The house is in mom's name. I hid the deed. She is in a coma. How am I supposed to sell it? The car is already leveraged for a business loan. You are her daughter-in-law. She is lying in there fighting for her life and you are getting cheap over a piece of dirt in the middle of nowhere? Do you want me to make a scene and tell everyone that you were the one who handed her the acid peel that night? I pretended to panic, taking a step back, clutching my chest with teary eyes. You are threatening me again? Did you forget I already agreed to lie to the police for you? I took the blame, I let them question me, and you still want to back me into a corner? I don't care about the money, but my family is poor. You know that. How about this, Paul? Last month, I remember you mentioned you bought a life insurance policy for me, right? Some premium protection package. What? What are you talking about? What insurance? I stepped right up to him, dropping my voice to a whisper, but every word struck like a hammer. That $2 million life insurance policy, the accidental death and poisoning package you secretly bought for me, the one where you are the sole beneficiary. Last month, a representative accidentally called my number to confirm my details. Before I could ask you about it, the accident with your mom happened. Since we are so desperate for money right now, why don't you just cancel the policy and cash out the surrender value to pay for mom's surgery? It's not like I am going to die from chemical poisoning anytime soon, so why wait for the $2 million, honey? The entire hospital corridor seemed to freeze over. The rhythmic beep-beep of the heart monitor echoing from the ICU sounded chilling. Paul stared at me. The gaze held no more cover-ups, no more masks of the hypocritical husband. It was the gaze of a predator realizing its prey had not only escaped the trap, but was now standing right in front of him, mocking him. He exhaled sharply, his jaw muscles twitching violently. He realized I knew too much. The accident with his mother was no longer a tragic misunderstanding in my eyes. I had seen straight through to his filthy, pitch-black soul. What exactly do you know? What game are you trying to play with me? He hissed through his teeth. I do not know anything, and I am not playing any games. I am just a country girl. How could I ever play games with a brilliant biochemist like you? I am just trying to find a way to pay for mom's hospital bills. If you don't want to sell the car, and you don't want to cancel the insurance, then you figure it out. I am exhausted. I am going home to rest. I will bring you soup tomorrow. I turned on my heel and walked away, not waiting for his reply. Down my spine, cold sweat poured, but my steps were incredibly steady. This taunt was extremely dangerous. I knew I was pushing myself right onto the edge of life and death. When a beast is exposed, it bites back with everything it has. But I had to do it. I had to force him to strike a second time. And this time, I would have an iron cage waiting. Only by catching him red-handed in the act could I secure the undeniable proof needed to throw him in federal prison and make him pay for what he did to me and to the woman lying in that room. The cat-and-mouse game had officially reversed. My psychological warfare in the hospital hallway drew a hard line in the sand. He knew I had the insurance policy as leverage. I knew he was the chemist who mixed the acid. Under one roof, we were no longer husband and wife. We were two beasts circling each other, waiting for the fatal strike. For the next week, Paul used the excuse of staying at the hospital to avoid coming home. He was terrified. He didn't know what actual physical evidence I held, and he didn't dare make a move while the local police were still casually monitoring his mother's accident. I used this golden window of time to silently weave my net. The first thing I did was hire a private security technician to install 3 microscopic, hidden cameras in the living room, kitchen, and the second-floor hallway. I left Paul's original red-eye camera in the master bedroom completely untouched, continuing to play the obedient prey. Things might have just remained a tense psychological standoff if not for the bizarre, anonymous texts I received on a stormy night at the end of the month. It was 2 a.m. I was half asleep when my phone screen lit up. A text from an untraceable burner number. I rubbed my eyes and opened it. No words, just a photo. It was a photo of a young woman with long black hair, wearing a beautiful floral dress. But the sight of her face nearly made me drop the phone in horror. The entire right side of her face was gruesomely disfigured. The flesh was melted, scarred, and a sickly gray purple, the exact, horrifying hallmark of a vicious acid attack. The woman's eyes stared straight into the lens, filled with a haunting, repressed agony. I sat bolt upright, cold sweat soaking my back. Whose number was this? Who was this girl? Before I could process it, a second text chimed. Just one cold, short sentence. Don't become her. Leave him while you still can. I frantically called the number back, but got an automated message saying the line was disconnected. Driven by panic and a terrifying premonition, I saved the photo and ran it through a reverse image search on Google. The internet is a vault for the cruelest secrets. Scanning through the results, a short article from a local news outlet dated 6 years ago popped up. The headline paralyzed me. Mystery surrounds suicide of female chemistry grad student. Self-inflicted acid burns prior to bridge jump. I devoured the article. The victim was Claire, 25, an elite biochemical master's student at a top university. The article stated she suffered from severe depression due to academic pressure, threw highly concentrated acid on her own face to commit suicide, but was saved. 6 months later, unable to cope with the trauma of her disfigurement, she jumped off a bridge, leaving behind a suicide note. Below the text was a portrait of Claire before the burns, smiling brightly. It was the same girl from the text. But the detail that froze the blood in my veins wasn't her tragic death. It was the final paragraph. The victim's family declined to comment. It is known that prior to the acid incident, Claire was engaged to a colleague at her research institute, Paul T. Paul. The room spun. 6 years ago, Paul had an estranged fiancée. She suffered catastrophic acid burns and committed suicide. 6 years later, his wife, Me, almost became the victim of a highly sophisticated acid disguised as face cream. He was a biochemical expert. Claire was a biochemical student. Why would a brilliant girl choose such an excruciating primal method to kill herself, unless she didn't do it to herself? Unless she was also a victim of the demon hiding behind that intellectual face. If Claire was murdered by Paul, what was the motive? Jealousy? Money? And if Claire died 6 years ago, who just texted me this warning? I stared at my phone screen. The darkness in the room felt thick, ready to swallow me. Paul wasn't just a degenerate gambler trying to commit insurance fraud. He could be a serial killer whose psychotic signature was destroying the faces of the women tied to him with chemicals. I had been sharing a bed with a monster for 3 years. A monster who didn't just kill, but relished in the agonizing torment of his victims. Remembering his hidden camera, my stomach violently rebelled. I had to save myself. And not just myself. I had to uncover the truth about Claire's death and drag this demon into the blinding light of the law once and for all. My resolve boiled over. I couldn't just sit and wait for him to strike. I needed hard, physical evidence. There had to be somewhere in this house where he hid his sickest secrets. The basement across town was the lab, but he wouldn't leave his most prized possessions in an unmonitored location. I set my sights on the only target left, Paul's private home office on the 3rd floor. Since the day we married, that room was a forbidden zone. Paul claimed it held highly classified corporate documents, so it was always deadbolted, and he carried the only key. But he forgot one thing. I am his wife, and I lived in this house long enough to know his habits. The next morning, when Paul texted that he'd be at the hospital all day arranging for his mother's transfer to the reconstructive wing, I acted. I called a professional locksmith, lying that I was locked out of my home office and needed it opened immediately for work. The guy bypassed the high-end electronic lock in 15 minutes. I paid him, saw him out, took a deep breath, and stepped into the devil's sanctuary. The curtains were drawn tight. The room smelled of damp oak and Paul's heavy cologne. In the corner, hidden behind a large abstract painting, was a digital wall safe. I had previously tried guessing his passwords, his birthday, our anniversary, his phone number, but they all returned an error flash. The red LED warned there was only one attempt left before a silent alarm would ping his phone. I stood there sweating, hands trembling. What is the passcode? A cold-blooded, narcissistic psychopath like him wouldn't use my birthday or his mother's. Narcissists are obsessed with their own achievements. Their greatest, Most diabolical triumphs. I remembered the date on the news article about Claire's suicide. The 14th of November 2018. I gritted my teeth and slowly pressed my finger to the keypad. 1418. Beep. Clack. The LED turned green. The heavy steel bolts retracted. The safe swung open. I dropped to my knees and pulled everything out into the light. The first thing I saw was a stack of loan documents from offshore syndicates. Exactly what I had suspected. But beneath those blood-soaked debts was a beautifully carved wooden box. I opened it, and a scream caught in my throat. The box was divided into velvet-lined compartments. In the first was a lock of jet-black hair tied with a dark red ribbon. Next to it was a yellowed human fingernail, sealed in a tiny Ziploc bag. In the second compartment lay a tarnished silver engagement ring. And underneath it all were Polaroid photos of a woman, Claire. Photos of her smiling before the attack. But the sick, horrifying detail was that every single photo had her face violently crossed out with a red marker slashed so hard the paper was torn. These were his trophies. Psychopathic serial killers often keep body parts or personal items from their victims to relive the power of the kill. Paul had personally destroyed Claire, driven her to jump off a bridge, and kept her hair and nail in his safe like medals of honor. My hands shook uncontrollably as I checked the bottom compartment. What lay there chilled me to my bone marrow. 3 items. Our marriage certificate, a copy of the $2 million life insurance policy, and a tiny glass vial, the size of a thumb, containing a pale gray liquid bubbling faintly. It was the exact same chemical mixture from the Swiss cream jar. He had kept a reserve vial of the lethal poison. He placed our marriage certificate, my life insurance, and the poison right next to each other. The message was crystal clear. I was his masterpiece in progress. He had prepared everything. When the cream failed, he still had this vial to finish the job, collect his $2 million, and lock a strand of my hair in this sick box. I grabbed my phone and photographed and recorded everything. The hair, the slashed photos, the vial. I didn't dare move the physical objects. He was meticulous and would notice if a single millimeter was off. I put everything exactly back where I found it, closed the safe, and locked the office door as if I had never been there. Paul. You have your trophies, but now I have my weapons. It is time to open the cage, throw down some fresh meat, and lure you out into the light. He was desperate for cash and anxious to tie up loose ends. Martha had been hospitalized for 3 weeks, racking up hundreds of thousands in bills. The mob was breathing down his neck. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to kill me for the payout. Knowing this, I decided to play into his hands. I would create the perfect opening, forcing him to make his final move. And this time, the 3 hidden cameras I installed would be the ironclad witnesses to his crime. I called Paul, my voice dripping with the sweetness of an ignorant, devoted wife. Honey, you've been working so hard at the hospital. You look so thin. I asked the doctor, and he said you could come home for dinner tonight. I made your favorite, and I prepared a special bowl of organic artisanal mushroom soup. It is so scary being in this big house all alone. Hearing the word scary, Paul paused for a beat, then replied in his usual warm fake tone. Okay, I will ask the nurses to keep an eye on Mom. I will come home and have dinner with you. I miss your cooking. I hung up, a sneer plastered on my face. Miss my cooking? Or craving my death? I set up a lavish dinner on the coffee table in the living room. I portioned out the hot mushroom soup into 3 separate bowls. Why 3? Because I knew a cautious monster like him would never eat something I specifically handed to him. If he planned to poison me, he would be highly suspicious. Around 7 p.m., the door unlocked. Paul walked in, looking exhausted, but with eyes darting around the room like a radar. I rushed over, took his briefcase, and pulled him to the table. Eat while it's hot. I made your favorite sweet and sour ribs. We will have the soup after. Paul sat down, picking at his food, occasionally throwing me a probing glance. The dinner dragged on in suffocating tension, filled with bland, meaningless small talk. When we finished the main course, I brought out the tray with the 3 bowls of soup. I casually picked one up, took a spoonful, and ate it right in front of him. Then I pushed one bowl toward him and kept the other by my hand. Eat up, honey. It took hours to make. Paul watched me eat normally. The paranoia in his eyes softened a bit. He picked up his spoon. Right at that moment, I clutched my stomach, wincing in fake agony. Oh God, my stomach is killing me. I drank that iced latte earlier, and it is tearing me apart. Just go ahead and eat. I need to use the restroom. I jumped up, leaving my half-eaten soup on the table, ran into the first-floor bathroom, and slammed the door shut. But I didn't use the restroom. I pulled out my phone and opened the live feed connected to the micro camera hidden in the vase on the TV stand, pointing directly at the table. Through the screen, every movement Paul made was broadcast in high definition. The second the bathroom door clicked shut, The gentle husband mask vanished. He spat the soup he was chewing back into his bowl. He stared intently at my half-eaten bowl, looked around the house with extreme caution, and then quickly reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out that exact tiny glass vial I had seen in his safe, the pale gray liquid sloshed inside. His hand didn't tremble. He expertly popped the cap, turned it upside down, and let exactly 3 drops of the deadly chemical fall straight into my soup. The chemical hit the surface, fizzed slightly, and vanished completely, leaving absolutely no trace of color or smell. He pocketed the vial, used my spoon to stir my soup, and sat back, bouncing his leg. A diabolical, sickening smile crept across his face. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tears of sheer rage blurred the screen. The evidence. Clear, high definition, undeniable proof of premeditated murder. I hit save on the video and immediately uploaded it to a secure cloud server. I splashed cold water on my face, took 3 deep breaths to steady my adrenaline, flushed the toilet, and walked out rubbing my stomach. Paul was scrolling on his phone. He looked up, his voice dripping with fake concern. Feeling better? Must have been a cold bug. Come on, force down the soup so you have some energy. It's a waste to leave it. I looked him dead in the eyes and walked back to the table. I picked up the poisoned bowl and slowly stirred it with the spoon. He stared at me, swallowing hard. His pupils dilated in anticipation of the moment I would lift the spoon to my mouth. I brought the spoon close to my lips, then suddenly stopped and wrinkled my nose. Ugh, what is that smell? I fake gagged. It smells like moldy rat poison. Did the mushrooms go bad? Paul flinched, all the blood draining from his face. What smell? Mine tastes perfectly fine. Your stomach is just upset. It's messing with your senses. No, it is awful. If you don't believe me, smell it yourself. With a sudden, violent motion, I hurled the entire bowl of piping hot soup and acid straight into Paul's face. The sticky soup, laced with the corrosive chemical, splashed all over his face and chest. Paul shrieked an agonizing, ear-piercing scream, jumping up and thrashing wildly like a monkey hit with boiling water. He knew exactly how horrifying that DMSO and acid mixture was. Even a tiny drop would melt skin. He scrambled blindly into the bathroom, cranking the sink faucet and frantically scrubbing his face. The sound of running water mixed with a barrage of vile, enraged cursing. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, watching the pathetic display of the man who had just tried to murder me. A cold smile etched across my face. Wash it well, darling. That soup won't melt your face off. You only put 3 drops in. But throwing it in your face was my formal declaration of war. The fake performance ends here. The real bloodbath begins now. The running water finally stopped. Paul stepped out. His face was bright red from frantic scrubbing, his wet hair plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his ruined dress shirt onto the hardwood. The panic of the acid had faded. Replacing it was a dark, psychotic, unhinged fury boiling deep in his bloodshot eyes. He was done acting. The mask of the moral husband and devoted son was utterly shredded by that bowl of soup. He lunged at me like a starving beast. His massive hand swung back, aiming a devastating slap at my face. But I was ready. I sidestepped quickly, grabbed the razor-sharp paring knife I had purposefully left on the table, and leveled the blade straight at him. Take one more step and I will slice your throat wide open. I didn't yell. My voice was frigid, razor-sharp, and thick with deadly intent. A woman who had already walked with one foot in the grave had absolutely nothing left to fear. Paul froze. The tip of the blade was inches from his jugular. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his jaw grinding so hard I could hear his teeth cracking. He realized the weak, submissive country girl he had abused for 3 years was dead. Standing before him was an enemy ready to kill to survive. You know everything, don't you? He hissed through his teeth, his voice raspy. Know what? Know about the acid you tricked me into using to collect my $2 million life insurance to pay your mob debts? Know about the secret lab in the abandoned house across town? Know about the safe with the passcode 1418 hiding Claire's hair and her slashed photos? Or know that you just dropped 3 drops of poison into my soup? Every sentence struck him like a sledgehammer to the back of the neck. Paul's face morphed rapidly from flushed red to ghostly white, then to a sickly purple. His pupils shrank. His arms fell to his sides, trembling slightly. He had never imagined I had dug this deep. The darkest, sickest secrets he had buried for years were being laid bare right in his living room. You went through my things. What have you done? You called the cops, didn't you? The madness surged back, and he shifted his weight, preparing to rush me despite the knife. Think about it, I sneered, the knife unwavering. If the FBI was already involved, do you think you'd still be standing here growling at me? I have sent all the photos, the audio recordings, and the high-def video of you poisoning my soup to a secure cloud drive. It's programmed to automatically forward everything to the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force and Claire's family if I don't log in to cancel the dead man switch within 24 hours. You want to kill me right now? Go ahead. A life for a life. My parents lose a daughter, but you will rot in federal prison, known to the world as a psychopathic serial killer, despised by everyone. My absolute resolve and suicidal bluff successfully locked down Paul's violent impulse. He was a narcissist. He cared about his image, his ego, and he feared death. He calculated every murder to leave no trace. But now, completely exposed and facing life in a federal penitentiary, he broke. He backed away, tearing at his hair, pacing the living room like a trapped animal looking for a way out. Right then, his phone rang. He yanked it out, glanced at the screen, and his face dropped even further. He rejected the call. Immediately, a text popped up. He read it, then collapsed onto the couch, burying his head in his hands. I knew exactly what it was. The loan sharks. The deadline was up, and his $2 million payday was currently holding a knife to his throat. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was the hospital. I stepped back, keeping distance from Paul, and hit speakerphone with my left hand. Hello, is this the family of Martha? The nurse asked. Please come to the hospital immediately. The patient has woken from her coma, but she is completely hysterical. She keeps screaming for her son. We cannot keep injecting her with sedatives. I looked at Paul. He heard every word. His mother was awake. Her panic wasn't just physical pain. She had clearly realized the horrifying truth of that night. I hung up and gestured toward the door with my chin. Let's go, hubby. Your mom is calling for you. A devoted son can't be absent when his mother needs him most. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off him, my hand gripping the knife. We took separate cars to the hospital. On the drive, my mind raced. Why was Martha screaming for Paul? What did she know? When we reached the ICU, through the isolation glass, I saw Martha thrashing on the bed despite her wrists being strapped down with medical restraints. The thick white bandages around her head were seeping fresh blood. Her eyes were completely ruined. Nothing but dark, empty sockets. But when she heard Paul's footsteps enter the room, she stopped thrashing. Her stiff neck snapped toward the sound, and from her ruined, festering mouth, a raspy, demonic shriek pierced through the soundproof walls. You animal! You tried to kill your wife. You destroyed me. That cream! You did it on purpose. Give me my eyes back. Give me my face. Claire. Claire's ghost is back for revenge. Claire is back for revenge. The entire hospital hallway turned to stone. The nurses froze, jaws dropping. A freezing chill shot down my spine. That night, while the acid melted her to the bone, Martha must have heard Paul screaming in a panic over the phone. Or she finally put the pieces together. And she mentioned Claire. Why did she know about Claire? Did this mother help cover up her son's murder 6 years ago? Paul stood completely paralyzed, his face the color of a corpse. He realized the truth wasn't just in my hands. His own mother had just become the star witness against him. He looked down at his crippled mother on the bed. There was no pity, no remorse, just absolute, freezing calculation. A desperate murderer backed into a corner. He would pull her plug to silence her if he had to. I couldn't let Paul kill his mother right now. Martha was greedy and cruel, but right now, she was a priceless living witness to his crimes, past and present. If she died, he would use his money to claim it was just trauma-induced hallucinations. I immediately called the attending doctor to administer heavy sedatives, and citing complex legal family disputes, I requested the hospital restrict all visitors including her own son unless accompanied by me. Paul stood outside the glass glaring daggers into my back, but he didn't dare make a scene. He was terrified her delirious rambling would ruin everything. He spun on his heel and stormed out of the hospital, leaving me to keep watch. But I knew his silence was infinitely more dangerous than his rage. He was hatching a far more violent plan to sweep the board clean. I had to strike first. At dawn, stepping off my hospital shift, I pulled up the anonymous burner number that sent me Claire's photo. Using a fresh prepaid phone, I texted, "I am Hannah, Paul's wife. I know the entire truth about the acid cream and Claire's death. Meet me. We share the same enemy." 10 minutes later, the phone buzzed. A meeting was set at a quiet diner downtown for 9 a.m. The person who showed up was a young man, maybe 24 or 25. He wore a dark hoodie pulled low. He sat down, pulled a thick stack of files from his backpack, and pushed it toward me. His eyes were burning with vengeance. "I am Mike, Claire's younger brother. I sent you the photo. I have been tracking Paul for 6 years, and I've been watching you since the day you married him. The night the ambulance took Martha away, I knew he had struck again. You are incredibly lucky to be alive." I looked at the files. Claire's medical records, the initial police reports, and a partially burned diary. My sister didn't commit suicide. Mike gritted his teeth, his voice bleeding with grief. She was an optimistic girl preparing for a PhD program. She found out Paul stole her biochemical research and sold it to a rival firm to pay his gambling debts. They had a huge fight. That night, she drank a glass of juice he gave her and passed out. When she woke up, her face was completely destroyed by acid. He staged it to look like self-inflicted burns from depression. The police found no fingerprints, and there was no security footage of him at her apartment. He had a perfect alibi. He was working a night shift at the lab. The case was closed as a suicide attempt. My spine turned to ice. The exact same playbook. Drug the victim, administer untraceable chemicals, fake a perfect alibi. What about the bridge? I asked, my voice shaking. Mike slammed his fist on the table, tears spilling. He did that too. My sister was destroyed, but she didn't give up. She was quietly gathering evidence of his corporate espionage. He panicked, drugged her again, and personally threw her off that bridge, leaving a fake suicide note. And Martha, his mother, she was the one who deleted the neighborhood security footage that night. For 6 years, my family pleaded with the authorities, but we had no physical evidence. He used his money and connections to bury it. That monster got to live his life, get promoted, get married. Everything was out in the open. Martha wasn't an innocent victim. She was an accomplice to murder. No wonder she screamed about Claire's ghost in her delirium. Her greed stealing my face cream was absolute poetic karma for her complicity in murder. I pulled out my phone and showed Mike everything I had. Liam's lab results, the photos of the safe with Claire's hair, and the high-def video of Paul dropping the poison into my soup. Seeing his sister's slashed photo, Mike broke down sobbing. He buried his face in his arms, his shoulders heaving with agony. I gently placed a hand on his shoulder. My voice was as cold as ice. Mike, you are not fighting alone anymore. I hold the physical evidence of his crimes. But if we just hand this to the police now, with his wealth, he could flee the country, or hire lawyers to twist the truth. We need to catch him red-handed. An airtight, undeniable trap. Are you willing to risk your life with me to play one final hand with this demon and get justice for your sister? Mike wiped his tears, looking up with a fierce, unbreakable resolve. Tell me what to do. I will trade my life for his. We put our heads together and mapped out a meticulous plan to use the full weight of federal law enforcement to ensnare the intellectual killer. Leaving the diner, we went straight to the local FBI field office. We bypassed the local police entirely. We needed a federal task force immune to Paul's local influence. We were met by a seasoned FBI special agent. He listened to our story, his jaw tight, his brow deeply furrowed. At first, he was skeptical. It sounded like a Hollywood thriller. But when I dropped the USB drive on his desk, the chemical spectrum, the hospital stairwell audio, the photos of the safe, and the 4K video of Paul dropping acid into my soup, the atmosphere in the room completely shifted. This is phenomenal evidence, the agent said, his eyes sharp. Hannah, you are incredibly brave, but you are playing with fire. A serial killer with biochemical expertise, backed into a corner by debt, is highly unpredictable. We have enough to arrest him right now for attempted murder. I shook my head, my gaze unwavering. No, agent. If you arrest him for the soup, he gets a good lawyer, pleads down to assault or attempted manslaughter, and gets out in a few years. Plus, the evidence regarding Claire's murder 6 years ago is circumstantial. It's too hard to reopen a closed suicide case on this alone. I want him to pay for everything. I want the maximum penalty. So what is your plan? I am going back to that house. I will force him to confess to what he did to Claire and what he did to his mother. I need you to set up a live surveillance wire. Catch him in the act when he tries to silence me for good. The agent thought deeply. It was a massive risk, putting a civilian in a lethal scenario. But it was the only way to secure a bulletproof confession from a cunning psychopath. The FBI agreed. They wired me with a microscopic audio-video transmitter disguised as a button on my jacket. The feed would go straight to a command van parked 2 blocks away. A SWAT team would be on standby. If I gave the safe word, they would breach the doors in under 15 seconds. That afternoon, I walked back into the 3-story townhouse. A massive storm was rolling in, the wind howling through the old oak trees out front. The sky was gunmetal gray, thunder rumbling, a perfect backdrop for a bloodbath. I knew Paul was home. His BMW was in the garage. I unlocked the door. The house was pitch black. He was sitting in the leather armchair in the corner of the living room, his back to me, holding a glass of blood-red whiskey. A flash of lightning illuminated his hollow, deranged face. He didn't flinch when I walked in. He slowly swiveled his chair around and set the glass down. The mask was entirely gone. His eyes stripped away all pretense, revealing the primal, bloodthirsty monster beneath. "You're back," he said, his voice dead and hollow. "Where have you been all day instead of taking care of my mother, dear wife?" I calmly dropped my bag on the table and walked right up to him. "I went to meet Mike, Claire's brother, and I just came back from the FBI field office." The words hit him like a lit match in a powder keg. Paul shot up. He knocked the whiskey glass off the table. It shattered on the floor, sending sharp shards flying. He gritted his teeth, glaring at me, his chest heaving violently. But before he could speak, I delivered the fatal blow. "Surprised? I know everything, Paul. I know you stole Claire's research, drugged her, melted her face with acid, and threw her off that bridge. I know you used DMSO and fluoroacetic acid disguised as Swiss face cream to try and melt my face off for a $2 million payout. You are a psychopath hiding behind a degree, a pathetic failure who survives by feeding on the lives of the women who loved you." "Shut your mouth!" he roared like thunder, the sound vibrating through the house. His ego, stripped bare and trampled, completely shattered his sanity. He didn't even care to deny it anymore. "Yeah, I did it. So what, you stupid bitch?" He pointed directly at my face, a twisted, psychotic smile on his lips. "Claire deserved to die. She threatened to expose me to the board. And you deserve to die too. I fed and clothed you for 3 years. Now that I am in trouble, offering up your pathetic life to save me is the least you can do. You women are all stupid. Stupid enough to believe in love. You think going to the FBI scares me? Tonight I take your life, and tomorrow I'm on a plane out of the country. Nobody can touch me." As the words left his mouth, he reached behind his back and pulled out a massive, gleaming hunting knife. The game was over. The confession was recorded. I reached up and tapped the button on my jacket. "I am not blind, Paul. You lost this game." I took a step back and screamed at the top of my lungs. "Action!" My scream tore through the silence, blending with a massive crack of thunder that rattled the windows. In a fraction of a second, Paul's pupils shrunk to pinpricks. The survival instinct of a killer made him instantly realize what was happening. His eyes locked onto the slightly protruding button on my jacket, the tiny camera lens glinting in the dark. He understood everything. His sadistic confession wasn't just for me. It had been broadcast live to federal agents waiting outside. "You bitch, you wired me." He unleashed a horrifying guttural roar that didn't even sound human. Simultaneously, he kicked the heavy oak coffee table between us. The table slammed into my knees, knocking me off balance. I stumbled backward. 15 seconds. That was the FBI's guarantee. 15 seconds in normal life is a blink. But trapped in a room with a massive, deranged man holding a hunting knife, 15 seconds felt like a lifetime. I had to survive them. Paul charged like a shadow, the gleaming blade slicing downward, aimed straight at my chest. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I threw myself to the side, rolling across the rug. The knife plunged deep into the leather couch where I had just been standing, ripping the expensive upholstery with a sickening tear. "You think the cops can save you? If I die, you are coming to hell with me," he snarled, his eyes completely bloodshot. He wrenched the knife free and spun around for a second strike. I couldn't stand up in time. My hands scrambled blindly across the floor and grabbed a massive, jagged shard of the broken whiskey glass. As his shadow loomed over me, I gritted my teeth and drove the sharp glass spike directly into his calf with every ounce of strength I had. "Egg!" Paul howled in agony. The glass pierced through his suit pants, burying deep into his muscle. Blood poured out. The sudden, agonizing pain made him stumble, and the knife swing missed, slicing across my left bicep. A freezing sensation shot up my arm, immediately followed by burning pain as blood soaked my sleeve. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. Using his moment of imbalance, I kicked both feet squarely into his stomach, knocking him backward, and scrambled to my feet. I had to run. The front door was electronically deadbolted. My only path was the kitchen, a tight space with plenty of objects to use as weapons. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds. I barely made it into the kitchen, reaching for the meat cleaver on the rack, when a terrifying force yanked me backward. Paul had caught up, ignoring his bleeding leg entirely. His massive hand clamped into my hair, ripping my head back so hard I thought my scalp would tear off. Tears sprang to my eyes. "You think you're so smart? 3 years I harbored a snake in my house. You pushed me to the brink. Now watch this." He locked his thick right arm around my throat in a chokehold, pinning me against his heaving chest. The sour smell of sweat and blood made me gag. He dropped the hunting knife on the tile floor. It clattered away. The knife wasn't his weapon of choice anymore. His left hand reached into his pocket and pulled out the tiny glass vial. "The acid. 5, 6, 7 seconds. Do you know how Claire screamed when this ate her face? I had to smother her mouth so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Her face melted like hot wax. Today, you get to taste it. I am going to melt that smug face off and see if the cops can even identify you. He was completely insane. His maniacal laughter echoed in the kitchen. His thumb flicked the cap off the vial. Instantly, that nauseating, acrid stench filled the air. The vial was less than 8 inches from my face. I thrashed wildly. I kicked the cabinets, clawed at the arm choking me, but it was useless. The adrenaline-fueled strength of a dying man was too much. His arm was like an iron vise. I could feel the heat radiating from the liquid death. 8, 9, 10 seconds. If that acid hit my face, I wouldn't die right away. I would go blind. My flesh would melt and blacken. I would rot down to the bone, just like Martha, just like Claire. Absolute, suffocating terror washed over me. But that terror triggered a massive dump of adrenaline straight into my heart. I refused to die like this. I had made it to the finish line. I wasn't going to lose to a monster. In one final, desperate move, I stopped struggling with my hands. Instead, I tensed my neck, threw my head back slightly, and clamped my jaw down onto the thick forearm choking me. I bit down with the sheer force of survival, sinking my teeth deep into his flesh until the warm, metallic taste of blood flooded my mouth. I locked my jaw and refused to let go. "Ah, you crazy bitch!" Paul shrieked. Pure reflex caused his arm to loosen its grip. At the exact same moment, his left hand holding the vial jerked. The liquid sloshed, and several drops of the lethal acid splashed out, landing directly on the back of his own left hand. A split second later, a sickening hiss echoed. The skin on Paul's hand instantly turned a ghastly white, then a glowing red. Foul-smelling smoke billowed off his flesh as the chemical incinerated his tissue at terrifying speed. The bone-deep agony forced him to drop the glass vial. It shattered on the floor. The gray liquid spilled across the ceramic tiles, instantly foaming white and eating straight through the grout. 11, 12, 13 seconds. Freed from his grip, I collapsed to the floor and rolled as far away from the smoking puddle of acid as possible. Paul fell to his knees, gripping his melting hand, screaming the most vile, degenerate curses imaginable. But he looked up at me, his eyes completely bloodshot, his murderous intent undiminished. He didn't care about his hand anymore. He grabbed a paring knife from the counter and lunged at me. "I'll kill you, I'll stab you to death," he roared. I backed into the corner, blindly grabbing a heavy wooden cutting board. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding the board up like a shield, bracing for the impact of a cornered beast. 14, 15 seconds. Boom. A deafening explosion rocked the living room. The heavy, double-reinforced oak doors, the pride of Paul's wealthy facade, were blown completely off their hinges by the SWAT team's breaching charges. The door frames shattered into splinters. "FBI! Drop the weapon! Get on the ground!" Authoritative, thunderous voices commanded the room. Blinding tactical flashlights equipped with red laser sights swept wildly through the living room before locking onto the kitchen. 4 SWAT operators in heavy tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, flooded in like a tidal wave. Paul froze mid-lunge. The blinding lights disoriented him, his blade raised halfway, but his sheer madness completely hijacked his brain. Instead of dropping the knife, he lunged at me again. Bang! A gunshot rang out. A rubber bullet struck Paul square in the forearm, holding the knife. He howled as the blade flew from his hand, embedding itself into the cabinet door. Less than a second later, 2 SWAT operators tackled him like linebackers. One slammed him face first into the tile floor, driving a knee hard into his spine. The other wrenched his arms behind his back. The cold, metallic click of steel handcuffs locking around the serial killer's wrists echoed through the room. "Paul T., you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The lead agent's voice was sharp and commanding, utterly shattering the last illusion of the intellectual hypocrite. Paul was pinned to the floor, right next to the bubbling puddle of his own acid, dust from the breached doors settling in the air around him. He struggled to lift his head to look at me. The arrogance was gone. The sophisticated facade was gone. All that remained was pathetic, cowardly terror. He started sobbing, crocodile tears streaming down his twisted face. "Hannah! Hannah, please help me. Tell them to let me go. I was wrong. I'm sorry," he whimpered. A display of cowardice so pathetic it made me sick. A female agent rushed over and helped me to my feet. My arm was still bleeding, my entire body trembling violently from the adrenaline crash. But I stood tall. I looked down at the man groveling at my feet, the man I had shared a bed with, the man who used the guise of love to dig my grave. The law will forgive you, Paul, right after you pay with your life for Claire, for your mother's eyes, and for my family's trauma. Go rot in hell. I turned my back and walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind the stench of acid and lies. The storm outside had passed. The rain was stopping, and the cool night breeze blew through the shattered front doors, washing away the filth of this house of horrors. I survived. My war was over. That night ended with police sirens wailing through the affluent neighborhood. The blue and red lights painted the old oak trees, waking up the entire block. Neighbors poured out into the street, whispering and pointing as the successful, intellectual biochemist, the pride of the neighborhood, was frog-marched into an armored transport van in handcuffs, his clothes torn, one hand heavily bandaged from acid burns. I sat in the back of an ambulance getting my arm bandaged. Watching the transport van disappear into the night, I let out a long, shuddering exhale. A 1,000-pound boulder that had crushed my chest for 3 years was finally lifted. The next day, the FBI executed search warrants across all of Paul's properties. The abandoned house in the suburbs was exactly as I predicted. The hidden basement was a fully functioning biochemical lab. Agents confiscated dozens of unmarked containers of toxic chemicals, test tubes, and journals detailing the formulation of dermal absorption poisons. Most horrifyingly, they found the empty vials used to murder Claire 6 years ago. At the townhouse, the safe behind the abstract painting was cracked. When the sickening evidence was brought to light, the lock of black hair, the yellowed fingernail, the tarnished ring, and the slashed photos of Claire, even the seasoned federal agents shuddered. Paul was not just a debt-ridden fraudster. He was an antisocial psychopath, a serial killer who kept trophies of his destroyed victims to satisfy his megalomaniacal god complex. The criminal network surrounding Paul was systematically dismantled. The offshore betting syndicates and the loan sharks who had been terrorizing him were tracked down and slapped in irons. As for the life insurance company, upon receiving the FBI's briefing, they immediately froze and voided the $2 million policy Paul had fraudulently taken out on my life. Every avenue, every delusion of wealth built on blood, was entirely annihilated. Faced with an ironclad mountain of evidence, the audio tapes, the hidden camera footage, the confiscated chemicals, and the high-def body cam recording of his full, violent confession, Paul's arrogant resistance completely collapsed. After 3 days of intense federal interrogation, he broke. He confessed to everything: the theft of the research, drugging Claire, throwing the acid, and tossing her off the bridge. He confessed to engineering the DMSO and fluoroacetic acid cream to melt my face off for life insurance to pay his mob debts. The case sent shockwaves across the country. National media ran non-stop coverage of the cold-blooded biochemist and his million-dollar murder plot. The net of justice is vast. Though its mesh is wide, nothing escapes. No matter how brilliantly evil is disguised with intellect and a moral facade, it will eventually be dragged into the scorching light of justice. But in this web of karma, there was one person paying a price far more devastating than death: Martha. Nearly a month after that fateful night, Martha was moved out of the ICU, surviving the critical window but left with permanent, irreversible, catastrophic damage. I decided to visit her one last time, not out of pity, but to close the book on our history. I walked into her hospital room, heavy with the smell of antiseptics. Martha lay frail on the bed. The entire right side of her body was permanently paralyzed due to the neurotoxin complications. Her face, which she used to carry with such sharp arrogance, was now a horrific landscape of bumpy, gray, melted scars. Her blind, milky eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Hearing my heels clicking on the floor, she weakly shifted. Her disfigured mouth opened, letting out a wheezing, raspy croak. Paul, are you here to see Mom?" I stood silently at the foot of the bed, looking at the woman who had used the most venomous words to trample me for years. My voice was calm and frigid, completely devoid of hatred. "Paul cannot visit you. He is in federal detention, awaiting trial. He is facing the death penalty." Hearing my voice, Martha convulsed as if struck by lightning. She used the last remaining strength in her unparalyzed left hand to claw at the white bedsheets, choking out strangled sobs as cloudy tears leaked from her ruined eyes. You bitch, you ruined my son. You put him in prison." "No one ruined him." I cut off her feeble curses. "It was his own cruelty that ruined him. And it was your greed, your complicity in his crimes, that turned your son into a monster. 6 years ago, when he murdered Claire, you knew the truth. You deleted the security footage to cover for him. You thought God didn't see. You thought another woman's life was garbage. On my anniversary, if you hadn't stolen my face cream, the crippled victim lying here would be me. But God has eyes. You opened the box your own son prepared. You suffered the exact same flesh-melting agony that Claire suffered. Now, You will spend the rest of your life in darkness, paralyzed, carrying the guilt as your only son takes the lethal injection. That is your karma, mother-in-law." I turned and walked away, leaving behind the haunting, agonizing wails of a woman who had lost absolutely everything. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt a deep sorrow for human beings who, out of blind greed and selfishness, dragged themselves down into the deepest circles of hell. 6 months later, Paul's federal trial began. It was a media circus. Mike and I sat in the front row as the victims' representatives. Standing before the judge, Paul was emaciated, his head shaved, his hair completely gray. He never once dared to lift his eyes to look at me or Mike. For the charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, and massive insurance fraud, all executed with extreme premeditation and cruelty, the judge handed down the maximum sentence: death. The moment the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted. Mike collapsed to the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Finally, after 6 agonizing years of injustice, his sister Claire could rest in peace. The truth was known. The monster was going to die. That afternoon, Mike and I took a copy of the verdict to a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The sun was setting, casting a peaceful golden glow over the headstones. We lit incense at Claire's grave, looking at the bright, smiling girl in the photo. I burned a copy of the court transcript in a small brass bowl. The flames flared up, carrying the ashes into the evening sky like a whispered message to a tragic soul. "Rest now," I whispered. "It is over." As for me, right after the trial, I finalized an uncontested divorce, permanently severing my ties to that hellish family. I packed my bags, leaving the chaotic, suffocating city behind. I moved back to my rural Midwestern hometown, to the house with the blooming bougainvillea by the gate, to the smell of my mother's hot cooking, to my father's gentle smile. They hugged me tight, tears streaming down their weathered faces. They didn't blame me for marrying a monster. They just held me, thanking God their daughter made it back alive. A year after the storm, using my old savings and a small loan from friends, I opened a cozy little bakery on the corner of my hometown's main street. The shop has large glass windows that let the sun pour in, white daisies on the tables, and the sweet smell of butter and sugar that entirely chases away the phantom stench of acid from my mind. The small scar on my arm from the knife blade has faded, becoming a permanent reminder of my own strength. Whenever I sit quietly by the window, watching women walking down the street, I smile. Through the dark, bloody, tear-soaked chapters of my life, I learned a profound truth. In marriage, a woman can compromise for her family, for love, but she must absolutely never lose her clarity and self-worth. Submitting to evil does not bring peace. It only feeds the greed and cruelty of monsters hiding in human skin. When you realize you are lying on the chopping block, do not close your eyes and play the obedient fish. Open your eyes wide, sharpen your fins, and fight to your very last breath. Because your life is priceless, and justice, no matter how delayed, will always stand with those brave enough to drag the darkness into the light. May all the women out there live vibrantly, stay resilient, and find their peace. Sitting on the porch of my little bakery this afternoon, watching the fragile sunlight catch the petals of the white daisies, breathing in the sweet scent of butter and milk, I feel an incredible, profound stillness. The storms of yesterday, the horrific rainy night stinking of acid, the deranged screams of a husband wearing an intellectual mask, the bottomless greed of a mother-in-law have all faded into a nightmare belonging to another lifetime. The scar on my arm doesn't ache when the weather turns cold anymore. It rests there, quiet and gentle, an invisible medal marking the price of my survival, of my clash with death to reclaim my right to live. Looking back at the journey, from a naive farm girl carrying pink-tinted dreams through the doors of a wealthy family, I used to think that as long as I endured, as long as I took a step back and turned a blind eye to the small injustices, my family would be happy. I hypnotized myself with submissiveness, chipping away at my own self-esteem to fit the mold of a good wife and an obedient daughter-in-law. But you see, limitless endurance and boundless sacrifice are never the master keys to happiness. They are simply the most fertile soil to grow evil, feeding the greed and selfishness of monsters until they become lethal. My husband, hiding behind his corporate success, preyed on the weakness and trust of the women who loved him, using them as tools, stepping stones, and ultimately, scapegoats for his own filthy mistakes. And my mother-in-law, blinded by petty greed and her habit of stepping on others to take what she wanted, ultimately drank the poison her own son brewed. Standing on the razor's edge of life and death, I learned a bitter but unforgettable truth. Karma is absolutely real, and it never misses a target. The seed of destruction is always planted within the malice of those who seek to harm others. But the greatest lesson I learned was not the satisfaction of seeing the wicked punished. It was a profound awakening to my own worth. From the moment we are born, Society burdens women with so many obligations. Sacrifice for your husband, protect the home, compromise. But ladies, never let those expectations turn you into a fading shadow, a lifeless doll for someone else to manipulate. Marriage is a partnership, a safe harbor where two people lean on each other. It is absolutely not a casino where you have to wager your youth, your dignity, and your very life. If love brings you choking tears, if your home turns into a suffocating cage that strips you of your respect, please have the courage to walk away. Walking away is not failing. Walking away is saving yourself. Never fear being alone. Because being alone and true to yourself is infinitely more brilliant and peaceful than being in a crowded room with people who harbor evil intentions. When you realize you are on the chopping block, don't close your eyes and wait for the knife. Open your eyes, sharpen your weapons, and fight to the end, because your life is priceless. It was given to you by the blood and sweat of your parents, and absolutely no one has the right to steal it or trample on it. The journey from a weak wife crying in the corner to a woman who set a trap and dragged her attempted murderer into the light of federal law taught me that a woman's greatest strength isn't malice. It is a cold head and a warm heart. A warm heart to love what is kind, and a cold head to brutally sever ties with whatever is poisoning your life. We can be forgiving, but our forgiveness must be given to the right place, to the right people. If you are listening to this story and suddenly see a shadow of yourself in those long, sleepless nights, in those moments of swallowing your tears because of a toxic partner, please stop for a moment. Hug yourself. Ask yourself if you are living the life you truly deserve. Do not hesitate to leave a comment below, sharing your story, your pain, or simply a sigh of relief because you had the courage to walk through the storm. We are never alone. A like, a subscription, and sharing this video is not just a massive support for me, but it is a way for us to spread a powerful message to thousands of women out there. Be brave. Love yourself before demanding the world loves you. Life is too short. Don't waste your most brilliant years living in the shadows of fear and submission. Every wound will eventually heal. Every pain will transform into strength. As long as you keep your faith in yourself, the most glorious sunrise will always be waiting for you at the end of the road. Thank you all for taking your precious time to listen to my story today. I wish you all strength, resilience, and a life filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and I will see you in the next healing and inspiring story on this channel.